Thankfully, all of the preparation we had to do in advance has happened as extensive, but I'm hoping that you were able to get through that, because we would like to move through things at a pretty rapid pace. As you know, our calendar is getting shorter and shorter with the amount of time we have left before we present our final recommendations to City Commission on December 21. So we have a lot to do tonight, and thank you for coming and prepared and ready to look at it. And we'll stay as long as we need to get things done.
Thank you. Does anybody need a copy of the meeting packet? You good?
Can I have it? I have one printed sitting on my desk.
Do we have the newest one that Gina sent today?
I will have that for distribution when we get to it, Deborah. Yes, yep. So, thank you, and thanks to Gina. Okay, so let me just say a couple things about the agenda. In the packet, you have the agenda, and then you have the summary. The first sheet after the summary is the update of revenue options. What we're trying to show is which ones are complete and which ones are still in process. And so what you'll see is tonight we're going to focus on parking system, water and wastewater, and income tax. Then after that, what you see is every meeting I update the approach and timeline based on what we've got done and just moved it around to try and keep it current. So that's really a reference document, but also lets us track with our work. And then what you have after that are the revenue option fact sheets from those that we have done. But I want to note this, and we'll come back and talk about it. Plant Moran, the Upjohn Institute, and the city staff have now done is added pros and cons to those worksheets. And what I want to do is make sure that we review those as a group to see if those are on target, and we need to make any adjustments. But what we wanted them to do was to take the lead in starting to generate those as staff work on behalf of Pam. Okay? So what you'll see is that the other thing that I just want to note is that the revenue option on the parking system has been edited as to title. Okay? So as in terms of sale of the parking system, we'll talk a bit about that when we get there. And what I will also do then is distribute, assuming I do. You never can be sure of how easily I can use it. So this is the law enforcement millage, which is the one that Gina circulated today. So this will complete your packet. Folks could send those around. And what we'll do then in terms of the agenda is we'll do panel updates. And as we go through the panel updates, I also want to make sure that we have a chance to touch on the pros and cons of the various sheets. We'll take those one at a time. And then what we will do is continue fact-finding with parking system, water and wastewater, city income tax, and then approach to use in evaluating the revenue options, both pros and cons, the matrix, which I'll also distribute to get your feedback, and guiding principles. Okay, so we've got plenty to do. Questions about the agenda? If not, we will go to updated documents, first on special assessment districts. Jim, do you have that, or one of the other members of the staff?
The updated special assessment is attached, and
It's in a packet.
yeah, we did,
It's the first one, it's the first revenue, it's the first
Yeah.
section in the packet.
so we did, and Clyde might want to speak to this, Clyde and Tom, about the process for approval, and there was some question about that last time. Clyde, you want to?
Just a clarification, I think the panel may have been left with the impression that if a group of neighborhood residents petitioned, they didn't want it, that the city's commission's hands are automatically tied and they could say no. That's not the way the ordinance is written. There is the ability to petition the commission for them to consider not to assess, but ultimately the city commission can assess despite an objection.
And then the pros and cons are listed there, pros being it's a transparent process, it's for a limited time frame. The enhancements would be available for roads and parks where taxpayers are willing to partner with the city. And citizens interested in a special assessment district could be the basis for prioritizing city projects. Now, the cons is it really would be supplemental to our budget. So it wouldn't, you know, to the extent, I guess, that projects were included in our capital budget, that our other dollars were gonna go to, and this could supplant those, that might be an offset. But in general, it's gonna be more for more. So they're gonna be assessed more, but they're also gonna get that park or that street improvement that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So those are the cons that were noted thus far.
Hey.
Are we gonna be able to add or say?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but let me make a suggestion. We've got pros and cons later on the agenda, but yes, I think we need to go through each one to review the pros and cons, because to this point, they've not been vetted with the panel, they've just been pulled together by Plant Moran, Object Institute, and the city staff, okay. Any other questions on special assessment districts? We good there? There was an update to countywide millage for public safety, so we'll take that next.
And who wants the agenda as well?
Sure. Let me talk to them. We met, I think it was Lou Teeter and Tom Nye, and I think Public Safety Chief Hadley and Deputy Chief, looking at county law enforcement millage. That is coming due. They are going to go to a vote on that millage. It's every 6 years. They've been successful in passing that with wide margins since 1980. So it's pretty positive out there. It does cover the sheriff's department, prosecutor's office, and the court system. So I think it's approximately about $12 million that they do generate from that millage. Actions, then we talked about, are we really looking at replacing, doing away with public safety, or taking some of those items that public safety does and that other units and within the county also do, and if we could do that and fold that into the millage. So, for example, we came up with a couple here with the detective. We went to a countywide detective bureau. There's other units that makes some sense. Also, what about countywide public safety training? And those were two that we could get some numbers on from our folks, and that comes to about $3.1 million that possibly we could if it went to a countywide law enforcement millage, that would save us the general fund, just over $3 million. Concern is that in being able to get there to, and when we start looking at our best estimate when this could be operable, time isn't working in our favor, because we almost need to be negotiating that now with the county. We're looking at a new county administrator. We'd have to get something put to bed pretty shortly. But that's kind of where we came from. And kind of left it. I know that Linda, you're on. I think you've talked to someone at the sheriff's department. Tom, you had some things about wanting to throw other,
Sure.
other items out there also.
Jerome, I think you did a good job of capturing this, and I totally agree in the conversations that I've had that May 2016 is just too ambitious to begin thinking about a collaborative. And I told Sherry in this room a little bit earlier today, there were 3 public transit authorities that voted to approve a comprehensive transition agreement, and the city commission hopefully will do that. That was 11 years in the making. So we have some work to do, but I think the door is open, and even public transit and having all those partners sitting around the table working on that can work on this as well. So I think that we have time, And I think that shooting towards the next millage would be the most feasible to do.
Unfortunately, that was a 6 year, unfortunately, that was 6 years out, so.
Is there some reason you can't change the millage midstream for
I-
another bill?
Ken, yeah, probably could, yeah.
You could.
Yes.
You could.
So we wouldn't have to wait 6 years, we could wait a year and go back to the
Right, that'd
voters.
be the next time.
I think there's some work to be done, some conversations to be had.
I have a question. When we talked about this before, we talked also about consolidated dispatch. Is there a reason why you didn't put that in, or where do we stand?
That was already moving, we felt that was already moving forward to, and happening, and so to throw that into this mix now, we didn't think that that would be a wise thing, much like the transit, that's been moving forward.
So were you assuming it would be in the millage next year or not?
No,
Okay.
and it's being dealt with currently, separate committees.
Yeah, there's a separate authority,
Yeah.
and we haven't even begun talking about funding for dispatch. We're trying to hire a director right now. Again, it doesn't mean that we couldn't entertain that, especially if we're looking at some change mid-term of the law enforcement millage to add it to that, but the funding discussion needs to occur at dispatch, and it's either gonna be a surcharge on phone bills or some sort of millage, so.
Okay.
What would that save the city's budget?
The dispatch,
Yeah.
a little over $2 million a year.
And is that 2 million been, so when we look at the grand scheme of cities short, rough numbers, 5 million a year, is that 5 million really 7 because you thought you'd get a $2 million funding stream for dispatch, or if dispatch got funded 100%, it would drop it down to 3 million?
The latter. Yeah. No.
So I think that's gotta be, I think we have to look at that. If nothing else, you're gonna need a citizens group, and as we all look at Linda, to help with a ballot initiative to gain funding around that. I think that's something that this group certainly ought to be saying. We know it's a future-facing expense, and we know it's a future-facing revenue, and we believe this is the appropriate revenue source. Unless,
So,
whatever, but-
actually, Ron, I want to build on that. What my thought would be is that we included here with clarity that dispatch would be 2 million, and these two have the potential for being 3.1 more. Because I think that would be the way to look at it, because because we might get citizen traction for one and not the other. But I think to look at them both as a part of this would be, now, what it is a cost shift. So it in effect is an increase of tax of 5 million a year. But it
You're
can't be.
redistributing the base that's paying for it, the same as this would be. If we're talking about redistributing expenses, which is what we're talking about anytime we talk about taxes for people outside of the city limits, that's a redistribution based on users, the same as an income tax would be. So it is lessening the tax burden on an individualized basis for citizens of the city of Kalamazoo.
Actually, I'm not sure that's the way they've analyzed it.
No, I think maybe you mean the share.
Share, as a percentage share of it.
It's a tax increase on an individual basis, but for a city resident compared to their share in the community,
Yeah.
Right.
you know,
And,
Very small.
and so the reason we haven't included anything, because there's so much uncertainty around it. I'm all for laying this out, because it needs to be noted, but, for instance, if a millage were to fail on dispatch, or, because that all takes a public vote, we would be going back to some call for service model like Calhoun uses, which then we would be using our general fund. So I don't want to assume too much in this, that it's going to happen, it's not going to happen, because it hasn't happened yet, so. But we can certainly note that if this happens, it's something that can be looked at relative to this village, or.
Couldn't that be a separate fact sheet, even though it's in the same millage? It seems like that should be a separate item. It's
You
much
could do
farther,
it as-
it's
you
much
could do it
farther
as-
down the path.
You could do it as two
than
fact
county
sheets.
line.
You could do it as two fact sheets, sure. I just didn't necessarily want dispatch to get lost from consideration.
Yeah,
The dispatch, you're also looking at potentially having a use fee on cell phones, correct? That's probably
Right,
one of the
that was-
options they might look
right.
at. So that has a different set of pros and cons, which might justify a separate fact sheet.
Yeah, actually, that
Yeah.
makes sense, because there's more than one way to fund dispatch countywide,
Mhm.
and it wouldn't have to be the law enforcement bill, so it does make sense it'd be a separate fact sheet. Does that make sense, Jim, to you?
Yep.
So we will add to the packet, we will add to the revenue options, consolidation of dispatch countywide with two potential funding mechanisms, and we'll add it as an additional fact sheet. Thank you. Jerome, thanks.
Sure, no problem.
And Linda, thank you. Any additional discussion of countywide law enforcement village? Okay, Clyde, I think you have an update relative to some of the discussion last time relative to potential tax of WMU housing.
That's a non-starter. That's the best way to put it. In looking back at the various cases, they all seem to involve the city of Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan. Interestingly enough, going back all the way back to the prior century, there was a suit brought in the 1890s, and that went nowhere against the university. There was a suit brought, interestingly enough, about the law school when it was built in the 1920s. That went nowhere because when the law school was built, the quad was built on, the university had to acquire an eminent domain parcels of property that everybody wanted to sell. They said, well, that's not a public purpose. And the purpose was not only to build a classroom building, but a library, a dining hall, and dormitories for law students. And of course, that's a public purpose, and you're permitted to use your eminent domain power. Subsequently, there were other challenges to the university. They didn't go to dormitories and the like, but the gentleman who died in his estate said, you know, for whatever reason, they decided to challenge the taxability of various university facilities, including the student union, Hill Auditorium, and said, well, that's not germane to the educational mission of the university, and therefore we shouldn't have to pay our taxes are increased because the university is not paying us. And again, that was, the university won those cases. The final one was kind of an interesting one. I think you probably have seen, perhaps some of you seen the advertisements for Dale Sprick on TV. When he was a student at the University of Michigan at the time, he was in married student housing, and the university increased the rent on married student housing by $6 a month. And he objected to that, and the rationale was the university entered a pilot with the Ann Arbor Public Schools because the married students had children. And those kids were going to school, if you will, tax-free. And so the university decided, well, it's fair is fair. We're putting a burden on the Ann Arbor Public Schools. We will increase the married student housing, whether you had kids or not, by $6 a month. And again, that was challenged, and did not go very far. Again, the university prevailed. So the long and short of it, going through a history that goes probably a good 70, 80 years, we're not going to be able to tax anything from WMU or KVCC. The courts have broadly defined what their mission is for educational institutions, and you do get in a slippery slope. I mean, if for instance, the student housing is subject to taxation because it, if you will, competes with the private sector, where's that end? What about the library? Is that really germane? You can go to other libraries. What about Waldo Stadium and the field house? Is that really necessary? So you get on that slippery slope, and I can tell you that Dr. Dunn is probably well aware of this, so that the other public universities would band together, and we'd be whistling in the wind against what I think would be a juggernaut of legal talent trying to convince the tax tribunal otherwise that somehow some university facility should be taxed.
Clyde, thanks. Questions for Clyde?
I'll make one observation.
Thanks, John.
Just so everybody understands, we don't require anyone to live on campus. Okay? Now, we could change that tomorrow and say all freshmen and all sophomores should live on campus. And it would really enhance our overall bottom line. But we don't do that because we realize that there are people who invested significant amounts of money into providing housing for students. And to flip that like that, I think would be very unfair and a very inappropriate move. So we've never done that. Now, the reason that we want students to live on campus is the data are very clear, that their progress through to graduation improves significantly and at a faster rate. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, but we haven't chosen to do that. So,
At least that's the mid-seventies, required.
yeah, there's about 91, 92% of the freshmen that do, but they're not required. They'll say, you gotta do it.
Thanks, John. Anything else on that? Okay, work group report on parking system.
So,
Andy, thanks.
yeah, so we got together, just today for the first time as a group, and unanimously have decided that we really want to try to focus on where we think we can have the most impact on our mission, which is to generate more revenue stream or revenue alone for the city. And so that really gets us down to the 3 ramps. It's our feeling that any downtown development that's going to go on beyond what's already here is going to happen on those vacant spaces. Most likely the surface lots will take care of themselves, we hope. Number 1, thinking about maybe privatizing the system. It would give us possibly a great revenue windfall right up at the beginning, but it also would force those properties back onto the tax rolls, which creates a sustainable revenue stream into the future. And so we talked a bit about how this would be modeled after the Ohio Turnpike model, which I don't know if folks are familiar with that, but
I think you probably need to summarize it if you could.
I can't because I didn't bring it up.
Oh, okay, or someone, whoever, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Who brought it up?
Like,
Oh, Mike. Go, Mike.
He just got off the very upset with the fees.
Well, the Ohio Turnpike was privatized a number of years ago. I don't know if it's been 5, 10 years at this point. And over time, you quickly saw an escalation of fees. Obviously, the asset was probably purchased at a reasonable price, and that revenue was enhanced over time. Where now, if you drive, border to border, it's just incredibly expensive.
16, 17.
Please. However, what we thought was relevant is they've invested in implemented technology, the EasyPass system. And if you use that, it's much more efficient and in some cases half the cost of the regular. So obviously, by having the high cost without the technology is deliberate. They're trying to push people into the EasyPass system, lower their costs, eliminate leave, things like that. So we just thought that model could be relevant to the 3 parking ramps. If investments were made and efficiencies were captured, maybe fees could be maintained at a reasonable price, but obviously lower costs, increased profitability. So we just saw an analogy there.
Okay.
It's a good one or not.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, because if we were to have these things privatized, they would go in right away and they'd upgrade the technology. And these companies have enough experience nationwide with what is the rate, that's the tipping point. I mean, how much can you charge before people will stop? And they have this, I'm sure it's some sort of an algorithm. So that was how we got to that whole Ohio Turnpike kind of discussion.
So let me just make sure I'm tracking. So what you're suggesting, or what the committee is coming back with, is that if we're looking at privatizing the system, the focus would be on the 3 ramps, not just the straight surface lots.
Right.
Yeah, I would say we're focusing on the 3 ramps regardless of how we study it. Our first premise is we want to, I'm sure people would beat this to death, but we just want to make sure that the revenue is being optimized, everything's being thought about, making sure we optimize the value of those ramps from a business standpoint. And then if it leads to, something that's of great value to sell, we'll look into that. So when you look at this, when you look at the fact sheet under the pros and cons, one of the pros that Tom brings up that's not listed there, it really would become taxable, because property taxable, so that's not, I don't see that there. It would be more than a one-time sales revenue. There would be an ongoing revenue stream in the city.
What were the lots are?
Go ahead.
How many spots are there? Because I know we heard from Jerome last time we were losing $5 a spot. And is that annually, Jerome?
That was an annual figure,
So, but DDA is capturing dollars ahead of that loss. So that would be my other question is how many spots are there? What are we, so we need to know cost effectively privatize this DDA.
We're going to look at the number of spots, utilization by day, by hour of day. We're going to look at that.
We've actually made the ask already today of Central City, so hopefully we'll have that.
So then could we include, so I know you talked about the 3 ramps, but I think you also have to include lot 9. In that it's the lot behind Haymarket Building, and the amount of lot utilization there is very high. It'll be as high as any of the ramps. So I think you've got to include that, because I'm not sure the way it's located, you could develop that site. I don't know, but
So,
there.
actually,
The reason why we weren't looking at lot 9 and the surface lots, there's a lot of requests that we're getting to develop. And we don't speculate, we always say, well, if you have, what's the project? And if we have a project that's viable, then usually we'll enter into a memorandum of understanding. We'll work through that until we get a project, or we don't have a project. So right now, it looks like we've got some, especially on lot 9, some real interest to be able to do a major project. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And some of those other surface lots, maybe some of the outlying lots that aren't as desirous, maybe something that we sell on to. But that's kind of where we're seeing on surface lots. So there's interest out there, a lot of interest.
So Mike, I want to go back to your point, Patty, please, maybe. So I'm trying to connect what we talked about last time with this time. And I think your update is quite helpful, but one of the things we talked about was the market value of the lots totally depends on their revenue generating potential. It has nothing to do with how much is invested in them necessarily. So I think what you're almost looking at is a 2-step process, right? Which would be to enhance the revenue, to position the lots for potential sale. I mean, one option is enhance the revenue and just operate them as a revenue generating opportunity. The other is enhance the revenue to enhance their market value, sell the lot for a one-time gain, and then they would be taxable, which would be ongoing revenue.
Exactly, that's exactly what we talked about last time, and exactly what Dan was talking about.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because there's some logic there, I just want to make sure we have, okay.
Of course,
Go ahead,
the
Jeff.
taxable, we'd have to footnote, and always remember the taxable portion is assuming that we don't throw something into the pot to make sure we got vendor or bidder.
Right.
Or what the
Incentive.
opportunity is. And
That's right.
folks, everybody knows.
Yeah.
Us, I mean, not us,
No,
but
right.
in the public.
Well, and I think the other thing that when we were talking about infill, John, if I go back to that, when we were talking about the surface lots now, not the ramps, one of the questions is, for the right project, might you have to donate the land to be able to stimulate the infill?
You know, we
Now,
have,
So it just, John, I'm just kind of building on your point, I think.
we had, you know, we had some information from Abby that kind of refutes that we would have to do that. We have a ramp in town that's running very, very efficiently, averaging $1,375 for a space, for a 900 space parking ramp. So that information tells us that's a cash cow. I mean, that's generating $1.2 million a year in revenue. Now, the expenses of that might be 30%. That's a good revenue stream, a good net income stream. Could that, you know, maybe it's its location, there's a lot of variables, but it gives us some hope that we can apply that to one of the other three ramps and maybe try that kind of performance. Maybe not, because of where they're located, but that one's performing very, very well. So it gives us a model to aspire to without subsidies.
When we get back,
Does that ramp have some of the upgrade, you know, the technology upgrades? Okay.
Yeah, technology's been upgraded, costs have been reduced, shrinkage is reduced because of technology and not human beings handling the cash.
Well, and that, too, and I think you've got to address in this, the idea that we need to take some of the, I would say, tertiary quality parking off of, out of the system. So we have gravel parking lots downtown. It was never the intent to be a long-term strategy. And if the city is looking at developing current surface parking into buildings, that increases the value of vertical parking of the ramps. So this is, yeah, we shouldn't assume that past performance is indicative of the future. In fact, we think past performance is not indicative of the future on this. And we also shouldn't assume it's one time. It's not uncommon for, in these type of deals, to structure a seat license.
sure.
So where
That's
an
another-
annual fee per slot, or actually usually it's generally a monthly fee per slot or per slot utilized, is paid to the seller as almost a franchise fee. So,
It's just another funding mechanism.
right.
Okay, we up to speed on parking?
I had one other question.
Go
I
ahead.
brought this up a couple times, and if it is not getting traction,
Oh, go
that's
ahead, go
fine.
ahead.
But I brought up that Chicago example where they
Yeah.
sold the
Right.
lease of all of their parking meters for 75 years for a gigantic lump sum payment. And it turns out that they have undervalued it. It's not worked out well for them, but I'm still wondering if there's value in looking at that, the value of the income on the parking meters.
And that would be meters, not lots, basically.
Right.
Because the meters are streets.
So you figure out where we've got them now, where else they might want to go, how much you can put some value on that over 50 years, and then sell that to someone.
Well, probably, Andrew, if someone who's going to purchase the ramps, they would be a logical leasing to control
Sure.
that. Because clearly, street parking is a function of government, where ramps are not. You can go to private or public, but they're gonna wanna maintain the price point. So that's probably one of those things you have to be ready to negotiate and put in the negotiation on the purchase.
That's been the challenge, one of the challenges in Chicago, is they did not set any kind of, I mean, there was no control, and immediately they went through the roof. So,
The rates went through the roof.
yeah.
So if the city held on to the parking meters, gives them a negotiating status or leverage with the ramps if they were privatized.
Yeah. Or to let the ramps manage them, let the city control the price point.
I think we should add that as the third item. We've got
Actually, that
ramps,
is- yeah.
We'll do the surface lots, and we'll also see if we can get a little information on the parking.
And the opposite of the Ohio example is the Indiana example. So the Indiana toll road's in bankruptcy because they fixed the price too low, and it hasn't allowed the operator to keep up with the cost of inflation. So they're in bankruptcy, the opposite, because neither side let the open market work. So it's not an easy thing. It's not just as simple as a real estate transaction.
Tom, I want to make sure I'm tracking with you. What you were saying is, if you can control the rate structure on the parking meters, it in some way
Here's the
creates competition for the ramps, is that?
The con with this concept of selling the parking system means the city loses control over it. So you'd have a private enterprise establishing these rates.
Exactly.
When they're not done, they would try to find that market rate, but still it could be contentious with citizens, and so we could always we could balance that if we were to establish parking rates on the street. So that'd be another factor is to consider whether you'd sell the whole thing, possible part of it. There's a lot to this.
So let me just see if I can summarize. So we want to build the sheet around 3 options, which is looking at ramps, surface, and meters on the streets distinctly. I mean, there might be solutions that coordinate them, but they're distinct in terms of the ways in which we go forward. I think the dilemma that we may have is not with the viability of the idea so much as we would with assessing what the potential revenue from it would be. Is that right? Because it would.
Well, I think once you establish the efficiencies of these ramps, then I think it's really pretty easy to go find out what the price is, the cap rate on these investments. And we could do 3 scenarios, 3 different cap rates, 8, 7, 6. It's going to give you kind of an idea of what they're worth, and then we would say, well, we have to pay off, if they were to be sold, you would have to pay off your bonds.
Right.
And then you would have a amount left over. Is that worth it? Is it worth going to that next level? Even if we say no, then we'll know the efficiency capabilities of these ramps, which we will insist that the professional managers achieve, or else the city could do it on their own.
Right, okay. Thank you. Carl? Okay. Anything else on parking?
I just wanted to remind everyone, we sort of talked about how there was a meeting coming up with the proposal at the last meeting, but they have the 5-year proposal that, is now, I guess, in draft form for the parking that includes some of these ideas. So just have that in our mind as, something else that's happening outside of this meeting that's already being worked on. I'm probably not the right person to summarize that plan, but.
Okay. So we got the report on the parking system. That shifts us to the point in the agenda where we move to looking at the fact finding, and the parking system is the first one there. Now, what I'm wondering is if the discussion we've just had is sufficient to redirect the group. I think what we're basically saying is there's 3 different options on the table here. Is there further discussion, or have we had sufficient, do we have a sufficient understanding that we can pass the group back with updating the fact sheet in light of that? We good? Jim, I'm just gonna see any questions that you have, are we good?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. Let's go to countywide authority for water and wastewater. Linda, I know you were working on that. Is that your report or is that?
I think that Clyde and I can do that together.
Okay, great, good.
So, Jim, Chris, Maddie, and I met with Attorney Robinson, and Attorney Robinson so graciously put together the fact sheet. And the discussion was, can we think about with the county of Kalamazoo, the creation of a countywide authority to provide water and wastewater services. So, as it says, that currently the city of Kalamazoo owns and operates the municipal water and wastewater system. And that outside of the jurisdictions that municipalities and customers own those sewer lines, the city, if I'm correct, has the water lines through all of those municipalities. So it's no secret that for way over 30 years or more, we've had battles over particularly wastewater. There's been several lawsuits, and there's sitting there, and so the feeling of the group was that we ought to explore this. The collaboration amongst the municipalities was certainly an important part. It would eliminate litigation, number one, and possibly in negotiations create and provide a payment in lieu of taxes to the city and its general fund. So there's lots of benefits. There are, I had a municipal official approach me today and say, we're really ready to have these discussions. So we felt like this is something that, as the county law enforcement millage, some discussions need to take place, but that we think that that's an important step to be considered by the city and the workers. Attorney Robinson, did I miss anything that I missed along the way?
No, no.
Linda, if I could, there were two things that were kind of noted as well. In terms of with the Flint water system crisis right now, I mean, if you ever want to talk about proving how important the water sewer system can be to a public service, there you go. So, you know, it would be good to look at that to say, hey, you know, look what can happen if you don't manage this correctly and work collaboratively together with municipalities. The second one was just that, you know, the success of the dispatch and the, you know, transportation that we recently achieved really with local municipalities. It's kind of a good time to say, hey, we've achieved this 2 times, we can do it this long. So.
Absolutely, thanks. Good point.
Other, we'll come back and talk pros and cons when we go through each of them. Any other questions on water and wastewater? Okay. City income tax, and again, what I'm going to just see if this describes it well, and then we'll come back and talk about pros and cons when we go through the whole. I think we've had multiple discussions of this. I think the challenge here was distilling it down to a single page. But whether we've actually done that adequately or not, we'll listen to the panel's feedback on it. And obviously, one of the issues is that there's actually 2 parts to it. It's what happens with income tax, but it's also what happens in property tax, if there is an income tax.
We were going to clarify that for residents, they would be taxed not just on earnings at a job, but at all other forms of earnings except Social Security and I think other retirement like 401k. And I'm not sure if we,
Yeah, so the question I guess there, Deborah, would be, is it clear on what all would be taxed?
It's adjusted gross income.
It's the AGI of your federal return, is my understanding. Kip, is that?
That was my understanding.
These
For
are-
residents, not for non-residents.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, residents, it would be the AGI of their federal return, if they're a resident in the city. But that does include more than W-2 revenue.
But I believe pensions are, pension income is exempt, so you have to take your AGI, and there's a box for additions and for subtractions. And subtract out.
But not 401ks,
I don't think so.
just a pension, a traditional pension.
Are you sure?
I'm not sure about the pension, but I know the 401k is
It's
not.
taxable.
Is taxed.
I think
Well,
it's
no,
all
it's-
taxed.
You can change the pension provisions.
Yeah.
Actually,
At the state level, but
it's-
not for the city.
it's,
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm with you on that.
so I think what we may need to add to this fact sheet, I think Deborah's making a good point. I think we're gonna need to have Plant Moran add to this fact sheet specifically what is for city residents included, because I think there's enough. I think that, I'm not sure the panel's fully clear on that. Maybe I'm speaking only of myself. But, so I think if you're a non-resident, it's on income earned within the city. So I think that's basically W-2 income for a non-resident. But let's just make sure we get both of those clear so that we've got the facts. Does that make sense? My sense is that, because the 401K, we just want to make sure we've got that on good authority, as well as other kinds of.
Well, that's what Plant Moran said last time.
Well, they're here.
They were clear.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
I don't have the legislation in front of me, which is why I'm not interjecting.
sorry, I
I'll
didn't
definitely
know.
make that clarification.
I thought we were gonna have you do a couple scenarios so that people could see exactly what it would mean. Is that premature?
No, I think we're gonna need scenarios too. Do you wanna answer the questions, or do you wanna do the background on it?
You know, I prefer to do the background. I thought I had the answer in front of me, but I'd hate to give out information that might be wrong.
So let's make sure we've got a clear request here. So what we wanna make sure is that we're understanding for both city residents and non-residents, what is taxed, okay? So I think the other way to look at that would be, what are the components that would figure into the adjusted gross income on the federal return, if in fact that is the driver? It's my understanding that it is, but I just want to be sure of that. And I also think that if it's a non-resident, how that would be calculated, or what it would be calculated on. My understanding is it's probably W-2 income earned within the city, but let's just make sure we're right on that.
What about self-employed 1099 people that don't have a W-2? I think that would.
That's included.
Yeah, that would, yeah, so that's, Deborah, that's why I think we just need to be precise about that. And then I think the other thing that we need is scenarios of how this plays out for residents who are property owners or non-property owners, and for businesses that are property owners or not property owners. Because you could, right, I think those are the, because if.
You're a property owner, you're deducting the property tax,
Exactly.
which is included before you get to that adjusted gross income, I believe, so.
And you're getting a reduction in your property tax as opposed to a renter.
Right,
that
who
receives
does
that
that,
reduction.
who does that, right, exactly. And if you're a business, what you pay it on, okay? Because I think if you're a business, it's revenue earned within the city minus expenses on that revenue, but I'm not sure of that. I think we need Plant to tell us that. And then I think the other side of that is, if the business owns property in the city, they'll get a property tax break. But if they rent property within the city, they don't. So I think those are the permutations and combinations that you've got to look at to make sure that we're clear on what the impact is.
We need to make some assumptions with regard to where the millage is gonna go then as well, because.
Where the
millage is going to go.
Right, yeah, so it could be a 14 mils would be one scenario, 12 mils would be another scenario, as an example.
I mean, there's an infinite number of scenarios that way.
Right, but I think if we just had them do 14 and 12, that was Randy Ebert's first scenario, so 14 is the highest it could be under the charter. And I think if you looked at 12, it'd give you what a 2 mil more break might look like. But I think this really does get a little, I mean, this is somewhat complicated, but I think we need to look at those facts. The other thing is, I think it makes a significant difference depending on your income level. You know, so.
You gotta start somewhere, so I think plan is where we begin.
Yeah.
Have them lay it out and we can tweak it.
Yep.
The way we want for different scenarios.
Yeah. So
Now also, remember now, this money that's generated, we can only use so much of this for.
that's right. There's
It
also
all goes
restrictions.
For capital, it's limited for capital improvements, correct?
Or debt.
Or debt.
right?
The additional
The
over what
over-
we're currently
So we raise all this money.
levying, yeah.
Can we reduce debt or not?
Pardon? It goes to capital or debt in excess of what we're already.
We don't have a lot of capital expenditures.
We can,
We're not building anything new, are we, at the police station or anything?
We have capital outlay every year.
Yeah.
But we go pay as you go and then debt finance.
So we really used to reduce.
but there is, you're right, Tom, there is restrictions on the utilization of excess funds raised
Right.
in this way.
Has anyone looked at these two scenarios that are on the back page of the keeping of funds? When we talk about under the 14 mil, 6.1 million additional road improvements, what does that mean in terms of distribution of those dollars? In other words, we're putting some people to work, right? Okay. I mean, is it, how much is supplies, material versus labor? And when we put people to work, we begin to generate some additional income and taxes. So,
That may or may not be the case though, because if you're doing those improvements anyway, but you're debt financing them versus having a check to pay cash for it,
There's
I
no
don't know,
net-
that's the
there's no
question.
net.
I just wanted to clarify what Tom was asking in regards to the, you know, the limits. That's all in these scenarios on the back page. 5.6 is what we're able to cover. It essentially has a heavy override built into it, if you want to look at that in a generic term, because we can go up to 20 mils before we start to get limited on where it can go.
Did we just go for simplicity's sake and say 6.1 million of additional road improvements rather than stating what it actually could be used for, in addition to road improvements?
What could be used for any capital
Any
expenditure?
capital or to pay down debt? I think that's an important point to know. How much road improvements you need.
Jim, do you move general fund dollars out into your capital reserves? And so that would, your general fund would be increased because you don't have to use it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Now, here's another quick question. If we look at these numbers, of the 5.6 million annual benefit, how much of that is paying bond, how much of that money would be, say, paying bonds for previous capital expenditures? I mean, do we know what that difference is? I guess what I'm getting at is, by paying down debt, is that gonna give us more headway toward,
Additional general fund. balance.
exactly.
I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question.
Do we have that answer in the capital millage information? Because the capital millage was essentially looking at doing just that, transferring from debt paid upfront to, debt payment, bond payment for roads to paying upfront over a period of time. I don't know if in the work on the capital millage, they captured that interest savings. or
Well,
not.
they would still, even if they did the capital millage, they would still bond finance the project, I would assume. And then you pay for it with the millage over time.
Oh, okay. So that still was bond funding, just transitioning to be paid for by the new millage versus general fund.
Okay, so we need clarity on what's taxed for residents and non-residents. We need scenarios for residents and businesses. I'm sorry, we also need clarity of what's taxed for businesses, okay? We good?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. We still need to review pros and cons, we'll come back to that. Any other fact-related issues on income tax?
Just wanted to clarify, we are not looking at any of the exemptions as a factor in this panel. think we sort of agreed to that at one meeting, and I want to make sure that was a correct understanding.
Be $600 exemption, right?
Yeah.
Standard.
We weren't looking at, as a panel, altering that number.
No, I think we can start with that, and then we
Yeah.
can tweak it. Yeah.
It could, yeah.
I mean, I'd love to talk about it, I thought it was my understanding at one of the meetings that we did, as a panel, did not want to explore that as a factor we recommend changing, and we were just gonna go with the 600.
And that can be said, in Battle Creek, you can change it by ordinance, so it's nothing that would require going back to voters. You know, that's a decision of the commission, so in fact, when things were going better, you could bump it up, when you needed more, you bring it back down. So that 600, I think, is the minimum, and it was kind of an assumption just to start doing some analysis around.
Creative scenario, we can get into scenario after scenario, at least we know that that's possible.
Right.
Something's built in, and then you just tweak it from there.
Yeah. Okay.
So we will have this coming back for the November 2nd. We will have scenarios and get that all teed up for everyone.
Okay. So I'm going to now suggest that we take the fact sheets and go through the pros and cons of the fact sheets. Because remember, these have been generated, but they haven't been vetted by the panel. So I just want to get a sense of whether we're seeing them as complete, or whether we think there's additional work that needs to be done on them. So, and I think the easiest way to do this is just to take them in the order they are in the packet. Okay, and we'll add the one that we distributed tonight last. So I think what that means is we'll start with special assessment for streets and parks. And so what I'm going to suggest is this, that we look, that the committee review the pros and cons. If we're good to go, fine. Or if there's any additions or edits that we want to make, that we discuss those. And we'll just go through these one at a time. Yes, ma'am.
You ready?
Yep.
I think on the con side, that there is a potential that low-income neighborhoods would not basically get their streets improvements. Because if it was based on the fact that they would be having to come to the commission or say that they're in support of it when they have very little funds in their everyday lives, then you would, I think there's too much of a potential to see that those neighborhoods would be neglected.
Okay. Could increase neglect of street improvements within, streets and parks within.
Further expand the chasm between the two, I think.
Thank you. Okay, we'll add that. Anything else on streets and parks? Okay. We're going to do some significant revisions to sale of the parking system, because we're actually now looking at 3 different scenarios there. What discussion of seems like on the pros side, it's related to enhanced revenue, right? I mean, so it seems to me that it would be, some of you are way better at this than I am.
Well, we could start with let's see, if it was sold, you could have the opportunity for a lump sum payment to reduce debt obligations or for general fund.
There you go.
And the number 2 would be enhanced revenue based on property value.
Come back on the tax rolls.
Yeah. And the other potential would be, instead of a one lump sum, you could also do it over time if you wanted to spread it, but it'd be the same basic thing. Okay. Carl.
We talked a bit about the idea that the service lots are going to take care of themselves, but I think it's important to bring up for discussion. Jim, you mentioned that there's been some activity around Lot 9, that folks have come out, look for opportunity, et cetera. And I think that Lot 9 is an But as we look at the other underutilized surface lots in this city, a public call that says the city is willing to partner with a developer and give them access to property to build something cool that's gonna go on the tax rolls, has significant opportunity. I think that we should actually chase that down. And we should think about what that looks like. If we're saying that part of privatizing parking doesn't include those small surface lots anyway, we've got a number of small lots that could very easily be a couple $1 million development each. And we've got people from outside of this community who are looking for where to move their business, who are looking for where to grow their investment portfolio. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't take a lot of press to get a lot of people interested.
So it'd be a
And
way
as
of,
we
so,
look at whether we have the parking or infill, it's
yeah,
kind of where we want.
they do cross over.
It's a weird crossover that I think a scenario should at least be put together. I think there's a significant opportunity there that.
Yeah, the use of surface lots to enhance, to stimulate development in the room.
And this is just the development infill, is it actually use of service lots increases the value of the parking structure?
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying,
Right,
just
yeah.
by taking it out. of the
Yeah,
system.
just by taking it out of the system and getting it in private sector hands, you're increasing the value of the parking structures.
Okay.
I'm feeling a strong desire to go park at lot 9, but I don't know where it is.
Lot 9 would be,
Your parking
between,
Water Street.
it would be south of Water Street, between Edwards and the
Across
KVCC
from the
media building.
Across from the
Arcadia
festival
Festival
site.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. You have
Very
parked,
cool. It's
yeah,
very
you have parked there,
strong
but you just didn't know it's lot 9.
Brian, that's for your team, parks, right?
Yeah, it'd be, that would have been a much easier way to describe it. It's the lot, it's the lot you park in when you go south.
That's where our team parked,
Yeah.
and that's where we parked.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we'll make those changes to parking system. Let's go to, water and wastewater. And I have a question here, quite a, maybe for you or Linda, but, the third con may result in loss of an incentive for Act 425 and so on. Can you explain that?
Sure. Act 425 is a conditional transfer of jurisdiction of property, usually not within the city. It has to be for a development, or it has to be for a project. And what this grew up in the 1980s, where oftentimes a developer would want to put in a development in the township because taxes were better there, but it didn't have water and sewer. Well, and the city says, well, we're not going to give you water and sewer because unless you annex. And so Act 425 was adopted by the legislature so as to permit the township where the development was to occur and the city that had the services to reach an agreement for up to 50 years where the jurisdiction over the parcel would be transferred usually to the city and water and sewer would be provided, and usually there's a tax sharing element as well. The taxes wouldn't be as low as the township, not necessarily as high as the city, but the city would provide the services, oftentimes provide zoning, other inspection services, police protection, often police and fire protection as well, and it would be considered as part of the city for a period of up to 50 years under the agreement. At 50 years, then a decision would be made, sometimes in the agreement, sometimes it was deferred, whether it would permanently come within the city or remain with the township at the end of the term of the agreement. And it doesn't have to be a 50-year agreement, it just get up to 50 years. So that's in a nutshell what a 425 agreement does. And so, and as a result, one of the incentives, obviously, is that there is a differential between water and sewer rates paid by city residents versus non-city residents. And basically, it's a 67% difference. That is, for water and sewer services, the city resident would pay $1 for. Those same services cost roughly $1.67 for non-residents. So there's that differential between the two, and clearly, there is some vacant property on the edges of the city. I think all of you know what they are. The one involved is Ashmo Township. And what is the incentive there in terms of, you may be in competition with the development that's basically right across the road, that's already developed, the BTR park. In terms of those folks, I think do pay, are kind of within the city. And then if you develop that Ashmo piece, you're gonna get a break. Nobody's gonna wanna devote their resources to the existing park. They're gonna say, oh, we're gonna do it cheaper across the road. So how do you balance that? Another possible project is the Checker Motor plant on the north side of Kalamazoo, which part of it lays in the township, the county township, part of it's in the city. And so if somebody would come in and develop that, again, what's the incentive for them to do that when you've got a property, a parcel that straddles two different jurisdictions? So oftentimes, if you go to a regional, and this is really what our municipal partners want, is an equalization of the rates. And so if you equalize the water and sewer rates, two things are gonna happen. Number one, you lose that incentive for 425, at least one incentive. There may be others, but that's one incentive that you lose. And also, it's likely that the rates in equalization would increase for city residents and be reduced for non-city residents.
On the other side, if we were to establish a water sewer authority, in effect, we would be unlocking whatever value is in that system now. And if we didn't have to pay back the federal government for all the money they put into it, then all that remains to be paid off would be the bonds directly associated with it, thereby establishing the potential for a lump sum payment, surplus payment for the city. That would be a positive. The negative would be you'd be sharing all of the rates on an equal basis.
Well, the other question is, if the authority pays it and the authority represents both city and non-city residents, you get this situation where city residents will be paying for their own asset through their rates, through the
Yeah, the rates would be
authority
adjusted.
posted.
Like you say, the city residents' rates might go up a little bit, but the trade-off would be the lump sum payment.
Oh, well, I don't know if there would be a lump sum.
Well, that would be something
Because
we could determine.
from our municipal partner, they would say that's already been depreciated. It's really just give it to us for $1 and we'll run the system.
Would we lose some layers of administration? I mean, would we develop some efficiencies that might save enough money that the rates don't have to go up that much?
I don't know if the rates would go up, I'm just saying they would be equalized. So
Right.
non-residents would go down, city residents would go up, even if they remained relatively, if the income necessary to operate the system didn't change.
It would be hard to believe that the city rates wouldn't go up because they're so low now. As compared to peer communities, as compared to our township, our customers in other cities and townships.
Right.
So those rates would come up, everybody would equalize, so the regional rates would come down. But what it does is unlock the profit, if you will, that could either be monetized over a period of time or annualized in the terms of distributed payments back based on what the value contributed to the authority. So everybody leases their pipes and systems to this authority, and you say Portage's is worth a dime, and Kalamazoo's is worth a quarter, and Oshkosh's is worth 20 cents. And at the end of the year, you distribute it based on the equity that you put into trust. And if you wanted to monetize that, you could for a quick payment up front. Not sure it makes sense with the way interest rates are now, but it may very well make sense. It should make something.
Which means that we would bond it to get that value in cash?
You could.
And distribute that cash down
Yep.
to the various
You absolutely
jurisdictions.
could, Tom. Yeah.
Something
On the lines of efficiency, one, and I don't know if this would be a con, but it needs to be noted somewhere. To understand how we operate between we have municipal workers that maintain the water and sewer lines, but they're also available to snowplow in the winter. So we don't have to have 20 to 30 snowplowers on all the time in our public services. So we would need to, and again, anything's negotiable, but in order to allow for that to happen, we'd have to allow for those municipal workers to be, in essence, contracted back with the city. Because right now, we have the flexibility of using them both in water, wastewater, or charging them to streets when we need them in streets for plowing. So just something to note there.
And it's off topic a little bit, Jim, but so Parks and Recs employees, could they?
There's not enough of them.
That's what that was.
Yes.
You tried, you looked at privatizing that, so.
That's a slow, pretty slow, no pun intended, but, it is,
I see smoke.
I used to, Calhoun County tried it, and it didn't last too long.
Reason?
Within the last 10 years, yeah.
No, the reason,
Well, the reason, the expectation of service level.
Wasn't there in the private
Right.
sector?
They don't have the equipment, first of all, to plow major streets like we have. And they, to get to that point, it would be costly for them. You know, to hire a contracting firm, they just don't have the equipment.
Is
So,
collaboration allowed? Could you contract with other units of government to create pooled snow removal?
that's something that we can look at, and we are looking at on the equipment side, how we utilize it. And, you know, again, that's something to note.
It should also be noted that under the authority model, there is a lack of probably skilled workers in the areas that ought to do this. I mean, with the exception of the city of Portage that has its own water system, Kalamazoo, I don't think any of the jurisdictions have dedicated employees to maintain water and sewer.
Portage has outsourced theirs. So none of the water and sewer employees of Portage are Portage employees. They work for a private.
So, thanks, Dan. So the,
One other thing, Tim.
Go ahead.
So on the 425, I would add, so semantics, but I would put that in the pros, because there's no company that thinks a 425 is a good idea. It's not something, Checker Motor site, I can tell you the company that controls that does not think a 425 is a good idea. We have put companies have had to buy extra ground to not be in one jurisdiction versus the other. So it actually creates bad stewardship because they begin to manipulate. We're using too much real estate. So by doing away with that, you'd actually get companies that were better stewards of ground, and I think would actually stimulate growth in the city of Kalamazoo. So I don't think it's a con. I think it's a pro in that you would see growth happen in the city that would just not happening now.
Well, does the city actually threaten, I mean, does the city ever say, we're not gonna expand our water unless you do this? Because unless we actually actively make that threat, I think it's just a non-issue.
Yes.
We do, okay.
And as do other cities. But I can point out where places where Portage has done that. And we've pushed companies into the township because they didn't want to pay split taxes. So a company owned a piece of property that was in two jurisdictions. They'll move and do all the investment in the lower jurisdiction so that they're not paying additional taxes.
anything else on, thanks, Ron, anything else on pros and cons with water and wastewater? Okay, income tax?
You know, Tim, after we see the additional scenarios that we asked for, this
Might be
may change.
better, yeah.
I would suggest we postpone this
Okay,
discussion
that
until we
makes sense.
see those scenarios.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I think the concreteness of that would give us a much better fact base
I
on
would
which
agree
to
with that.
evaluate. Okay, that's great, thanks. So we'll defer income tax pros and cons discussion to next time.
I think we're going to add, based on Ron's comments a couple of meetings ago, kind of worst case scenario, getting Joe and you hooked up to get that.
Okay, development infill. pointed out on this is, we absolutely need to do whatever we can do to stimulate it. It isn't necessarily a revenue generator for the general fund. And
Well,
that-
not immediately.
Not in the short
Right,
term.
not, only in the long term, I guess that would be, yeah, thanks, man.
But it still has a,
But it's huge merit to it, yeah, I think we unequivocally think it's the right thing to do, it's just that it doesn't necessarily fill a 5-year.
But Tim, on this con, I don't think that's correct. New development needs more municipal services than it pays for in taxes if substantial tax breaks and subsidies are provided. I can't think of a single scenario where that's true. It doesn't, developments don't use services. So municipal services, so the people, I think that's too broad.
Well, we're not extending infrastructure, I mean, we've got the infrastructure we need, mostly
Yeah.
the sidewalks maybe, but I mean, it's.
New building isn't gonna generate more police calls,
Actually, probably less.
right?
yeah, less, and so, yeah.
A larger cost of police call.
So just looking at the authors back there. No one really, so, yeah, we're open to suggestions here. I think this was one of those trying to capture the notion that, you've got additional demand for service in theory without the supporting revenue. But on the independent or individual project by project basis, it probably isn't true, but over time, as they come on. Yeah, so maybe it's more broadly than just an individual project.
I think bare minimum, you need to put a qualifier that
Yeah.
for some time period, because they will, when the subsidies are gone, right, they will
Right.
provide enough revenue.
Yeah, so not on a project by project basis, and it depends on time frames.
Well, no, I think if you said the timeline,
Yeah, so still don't think, commercial development is not a cost generator for the city. So if you use that wording right there, you shouldn't allow another house to be built in the city. Period. So it's residents that cost money, not buildings. So I just don't think it's applicable. Now, I think you can say it is short-term break even and it's a long-term strategy. If we're saying this isn't going to address the budgetary crisis in the period that we're looking to address, fair enough. Because if we're saying it's a 5-year or 7-year window that we're looking, most of that stuff won't have positive. Although, a lot of it does. We're not in a retail office.
Here's the other thing though, even if you say short-term break even, but it's a long-term strategy, I think that's a fact more than it's a con.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a
So I'm not saying I don't think there is a con.
There's not a con.
Well,
I agree.
I would say there is a con, it's just the time frame, which isn't necessarily a bad thing,
But I think that goes up into the facts and not into
There you go.
You wouldn't do it because you're not gonna get paid tomorrow, you're gonna get paid 6 months from now. You would not make the investment. You just know that you can't pay your food bill next week based on this investment.
well, they talk a little bit about that under the brief description.
Right. We also need to look at consistency amongst our pros and cons on all of these sheets, because if we're saying for this item, a time frame of revenue generated is not a con, then as we get into other items, say we're looking at the public safety millage at the county level, if we're gonna say that is a con of that is the time frame, we need to be consistent with time frame either being a fact or a con on all of these fact sheets. I don't have a preference, but
I think
just
consistency.
I think the good shakeout there is maybe the time frame should just be its own fact. It doesn't have to be assessed as a pro or con, because then we're not looking at it. We're looking at it objectively as opposed to subjectively.
The key with this one is it doesn't solve the problem in any near term.
It insulates us from future problems, though, potentially.
Oh, yeah, no, well,
20 years, 30 years.
There's compelling reasons to incent it.
That's
It's just that it
the
doesn't.
charge of today's panel, but I don't think that anybody in this panel is here just to solve today's problem, and tomorrow's problem is not our responsibility.
What about the temporary economic benefits from the development right from the get-go?
Back to John's comments of jobs, and the return on investment, the economic impact on those drivers. Yeah, we can look into that.
We're not calculating the people that are eating while they're working on building these things or whatever it may be, so.
Am I missing something here? If it's an infill with a nonprofit, takes a good piece of property, why wouldn't we want that?
We're not talking
Why wouldn't we, or why would we?
Why would we? Why would we want a good piece of property, developable piece of property to be picked up by a nonprofit and developed?
I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
Ah.
Well, in the infill here is primarily residential, right? I mean, that's what was being
One of the
described.
assumptions that we made.
That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have a coattail effect on other, on other kinds of things, but it's primarily looking, I think, at residential.
Residential,
Mixed
commercial.
use. Mixed use.
Yeah.
I think all of the stuff that's going on right now is
Is
mixed
mixed
use.
use. Yeah.
Well, and most of the area we're talking about is zoned mixed use, so. Okay.
So
Go ahead, John.
I don't disagree with your comment, but I can't help but think of KVCC and what was once there and what a horrific mess it was for the city, and how not attractive and discouraging to people, and KVCC comes in there and infills that and makes that a beautiful area. Man, I don't know, you gotta be,
Taking care of the floodplain, the two locations.
you gotta be a little
Yeah,
careful.
I can't stand in the way of that. No, the private sector had an opportunity to step up and they didn't.
They didn't do it.
So.
John, Bronson, School of Medicine, I mean,
That was all my comments.
Strike it from the record.
By the way, I'm gonna say nothing about the fact that they do sometimes eat in restaurants, so.
Hallelujah.
Anything else I didn't know, we good?
So just so we're clear, we're taking the con off there, and where are we?
I think there's two things.
Time frame is a fact, and as Matt pointed
Back
out,
on
should be that way.
Has to
on
be
the-
Best estimate of revenue generated, okay.
Maybe that should, the timeframe, maybe Tim, should be on each one. Each,
Yeah, I
we
think
should
so.
have a time
As a category,
frame.
as a
And we can
category.
have broad, if this A happens, then B
Yeah.
could.
Well, we already have it to some extent, best estimate of when revenue would be generated, we could make that
I think
time frame, yeah.
clear time frame is a
Yeah.
bold heading.
Yep.
Okay, okay. Let's go to Public Act 33.
Yeah. I have a question on this.
Go ahead, please.
Similarly to the income tax, if this Public Act 1933 were able to be tweaked to our benefit and we were able to get it through, is there any possibility that we could also lower the property taxes? Like you would do tit for tat on the city income tax? That's a big question for Clark.
Yeah,
I mean, I wonder if there's a possibility of that.
I just don't know if the dollars would add up, because what makes the income tax work in that case, Patty, is the commuter revenue that would be new to the city versus this would be just more revenue from our residents. We'd have to bump this up even more to lower the overall village.
So the answer to that is no?
Right.
Okay.
If you lowered the property tax, you in effect wipe out any gain that this would provide. I think that's the right way to say it.
It's basically in the cons, which is that this millage is on the existing property owners, so this is just a tax raise on only people who are already paying taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay on that one?
You know, if this were to move forward, I think the timing on this could be really quite good. We've got a governor governor is second term moving out. Does Kalamazoo, so his work with Kalamazoo, a lot of
Right.
things, if the party will move. That's all.
Well, and we're definitely interested in realize there's an issue with municipal finance, so I'm not making any claims on whether or not there's support for this, but broadly speaking, we're willing to look at.
And we have received positive feedback on getting the legislation tweaked to make
From
us
the-
eligible.
from congressional.
From our legislators.
I'm sorry, from legislators,
Yeah.
excuse me.
Well, and we're also talking about police and fire protection, but police in particular, I mean, we have some challenges, we all know that. You've got to handle
Right.
it.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Headley O'Brien.
Can't find any pros for this one? No?
Well, I guess one is that it raises $1 million, that if in fact it's feasible, it raises $1 million more.
I think every renter would vote yes.
Yeah, actually, a pro is that it benefits renters.
Why is this one benefit renters?
It's not bad for renters.
Maybe
Renters-
initially.
No, their rent's going up.
Their rent's going up.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Their rent's going up.
Nobody thinks the wise guy.
But then would their rent go down if the millage were to decrease? That would be the.
No.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Up yes, and down no.
Yeah.
Okay. Capital Village.
Yeah, nobody's still there.
Just that there's a typo on the second comment, it should be not instead of no, but it's.
I do have a comment, and it actually goes back to the Public Act. If we're using the language would not broaden the tax base, can we use that in the kind of Public Act 33? Because it says different language to say the exact same thing, just so it's consistent across all of them.
I'd actually rather remove Act 33's language here because it's clearer that existing taxpayers will pay for this.
So,
I
same
agree with
language
that.
in both, but
Same
use the
language.
Act 30.
Yeah, use the Act 33 language.
Should it say only on current property owning city taxpayers?
The best estimate of revenue generated in that section, I'm blocking from the third sentence. The voters will periodically approve an amendment.
Should be an and in there or something,
Something.
yeah.
That would add.
That would add roughly.
Thanks, John. Is that
Or
answer,
it
John?
would need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, the
It would
voters would
require
need,
whatever to-
would need to.
Still not sure why.
Which one?
This one?
Yeah.
Where does the money savings come from again? I mean, it's just to the general fund, it's not, it's not a savings overall, it's just to the general fund, correct?
So,
Actually, excuse me, I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead. So right now, we bond finance to the tune of about $4.5 million a year.
Correct.
Capital improvements out of the, so that's issuing, and then the debt service is paid for out of, majority of it out of the general fund. So to the extent we could have a capital millage to pay that, that would be less money the general funds would have to put out.
It eliminates the debt service on the corporate.
On the.
Oh, you're still gonna have debt
No, you're
service
still
though.
paying it.
You're still
Right.
gonna have debt service.
It's
a shell game, it's moving,
Yeah.
gathering money from a different
Yeah, so
spot.
future, I guess for the future stream of projects, we would have a capital millage to charge to pay the debt.
Right, you'd be adding a new revenue stream to pay for the new debt.
The new debt, the existing debt
I would-
would continue to be paid for out of existing sources. So would that wouldn't fill the gap then?
Well, as the existing debt is paid off, then you would start to.
So it would over time.
The new debt is built into the projections for the fiscal plan right now, against which we're working to try to eliminate this, $6 million shortfall, right? So
And that's,
within the $6 million is built in the dollars necessary to finance the new debt, so.
right,
then-
and that's only savings
Yep.
to the general
Yeah.
fund, it's not, if you looked at the big picture, you're still spending the same amount. You're still bonding the same amount.
Right.
The taxpayers
Well,
are
so-
voted. Right.
Right, so in the context where it says this debt service is subsidized by the general fund, that's the context within which the
Yep.
word savings has to be understood.
Should we add in the cons that this would require multiple public votes? I mean, I know we talked about how it could be taken down to like a 5-year plan, but that's still 3 different public votes that this would be contingent upon. I view that as a con, just for, reliability. What if one passes and then another doesn't?
I mean, for public opinion, I mean, you have to have a pretty strong PR campaign every single time you review that, or you
So I think, maybe I'm not tracking, but it's basically just cost shifting.
With the tax rates, yeah, it's just you're adding 5 mils in a way that gets around the 20% cap.
You're taking the.
Or 20 mil, yeah.
General fund, which is the thing you can't.
Exactly.
Go negative, so you're just moving it somewhere else.
Exactly.
Through an allowable mechanism the
Right.
state's given
Yeah.
us, levy
Yeah.
dollars.
Any- Go ahead, Linda, sure.
Did we resolve John's question? That, so that this doesn't go out, it would say that we already presumed the voters would periodically approve something? That statement is pretty, I might have missed it.
No, actually, we added the language so it said the voters would need to periodically. Could be, yeah. Or it could be worded to say it requires, but I mean, the reality of this is it's hardly a given. Okay, so, let's do the county law enforcement millage, which is the one that was distributed tonight.
Wouldn't the other con be, you've got to get several different constituent groups to agree to do this?
So it requires the cooperation of multiple jurisdictions. I mean, I guess you could put it as a pro, but it's. But it's the difficulty level.
Yeah.
I think it's a
It's
fact.
the same
Not
thing with
a-
the water, wastewater,
Yeah.
you
There is a difficulty level, but it's a fact, I think.
Because there would be some that say that's a pro and some that would say it's a con. So it really is a fact.
Depends what they're spending and where they're gonna come out.
Well, and if you believe that consolidated government's a good thing, you think it's a pro. If you think consolidated government is tough and it's never gonna be done, you think it's a same fact. It's just a fact.
So we have had the necessary conversations, Jim, with Hadley and others about this, I think I asked that before, and I think that was yes.
Yeah, he was a part of the work group.
Okay,
And he was,
okay, thank you.
Jim, there's no consolidation or reduction of cost by putting all this together. The way this is written, as a pro, it's a transfer to the counties, but.
Yeah, and they-
There's got, whenever you do something like that, you gotta look for that, you gotta have some duplications out there somewhere that you're.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
So,
there's a-
so
there's
to
a
your
number of
point,
pros.
Richard, a pro is potential efficiency of consolidating.
That's what you should,
Yeah.
whenever you do that.
I think there's also a pro of track record of success. We've never done this with the dispatch. But everything else we're looking at lots of things that have never worked anywhere, and this is one of the few things we're looking at that in some extent has already worked here.
Tim,
Yes.
is that final comment a one-time or annual?
Which comment?
The 3.1
The
million.
final statement there.
Estimate of revenue generated?
It's actually, I think it's 3.1 annually, isn't it?
Should we put that in there?
Joe? Would be, yeah, that's the.
Annual.
That's an annual.
Yes, Linda?
Tim, I'd really rather that on the pros, the savings to the city general fund actually come out of there. Because because we're already talking about it below, the pros is that it would be collaboration for these services. Instead of highlighting that somebody else picks this up somewhere and that's where their eyes go.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So, one of them is the collaboration of services and the sprawl, just the city, people have said some other things. We're already talking about potential savings down here. So my recommendation is that we take it out of the pros and put the other about collaboration of services in there.
I think that gets to another interesting point about just how we're looking at the pros and cons versus the facts. Is that money and time are facts, they're neither pros nor cons. So thinking about where the money comes from or goes to shouldn't be considered in the pro and con range, because that's the only reason we're here anyway. Repeating it as either a pro or a con is kind of stacking the deck for that particular option.
So let me,
That's why we got 21 of you around the table.
so.
Say that again, Carl. I don't
So-
think I disagree, but say, let me get clear.
So the financial benefit, the shift of finances out of the general fund or making more finances available to the general fund, that's a fact. Regardless of which thing we're reviewing, it should be shown as such. The timeline for that to happen is also a fact, regardless of what thing we're reviewing. Therefore, neither of those should qualify as a pro or a con in any case. Because if we start moving facts into the pros and cons category, that it begins to
So,
become a
source of that
perception.
revenue could be a pro or a con,
Right.
but not the revenue.
But not revenue.
Yeah, the source,
Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Well, I,
So, go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say to that point, we've already identified on several of these under the con category that, a tax is just simply on our existing tax base. Do we wanna have as equally clear language on, which would be the income tax, water and wastewater and law enforcement millage, that's a transition to a regional, revenue source versus something simply on the existing taxpayers. We've already had similar language in the con category. Do we want to have that in the pro category? If we as a group determine that as a pro, that moving anything from city-funded general fund, city service to a regional county fund, county service as a as a pro, then we should probably have that as a pro category, consistent.
Yeah, I think what we might have here, so I'm agreeing, so this isn't a but, this is an and. I think what we're seeing here is that different authors developed these, and as a result of that, they may not be consistent across them in terms of the language. So I think what we may need to do is, so I think that and some others will be an example of, if they're now looked at all as a whole, we have consistency in the way that those are framed from one to the other.
Good point.
Yeah, no, I think it's real good. So let me just, so I think now we have two pros, excuse me. And I'm not sure that this is the right language, but one is increased collaboration across jurisdictions and service delivery. And the other is potential cost reduction from consolidation of services. And then the con is there as stated. Now, we may want to, but the consistency of wording may be regional, or, because I do think there are several that fall into very similar, and we just want to make sure we get consistent wording across. Okay. So I think what we've done is first review of all pros and cons except income tax, which we'll do next time after we look at the scenarios. I am going to distribute a document that if you're anywhere near my age, you are going to have a difficult time reading, okay? But if you'll, so I'm going to set it up, and we're not going to in-depth review it, but I think with the time we have left,
This is a pocket version of what we're doing.
So if you'll remember last time, what we talked about was consolidating this into a packet that had individual sheets for every revenue generating option, but also had a matrix at the top that allowed for us to see it. And this one, so here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that we only review this in terms of whether the categories are right, not review it for content.
And we'll work on getting it larger.
And the other thing is the pros and cons will all be obviously reworded as the sheets are reworded. But basically what I want to, so several of us thought about what should a matrix that summarizes include. So think of it this way. This is sort of the at a glance, what are we considering? And then the depth is on the sheets. So it was a question of, so we basically have the name of the item, the potential revenue to be generated, and whether that's, and that's in two categories, annually and then over a 5-year period. And then pros, cons, who bears the burden, and other issues. Now, we could totally change that. I just want to say one other thing. We thought if we generated too many items on the matrix, it becomes less helpful. So this is not to say that these are the right ones, but I think, if you have a matrix of 20 items, you're in effect regurgitating the sheets, I think. So my suggestion would be that we discuss whether this is the right framework. And I apologize that it's going to be difficult to read, especially for people like me that didn't bring their reading glasses. Is it clear what I'm asking? Does this look like the framework of the matrix? Because it'll need substantial updating in light of the pros and cons work. But
I would add
Good.
that you've alphabetized this, which I really appreciate, and I think that should be noted for the
Okay.
reader, that this is not a priority list,
Yeah,
but rather an
exactly.
outcome.
Good. Good. Thanks.
Does bearing the burden, is that really the appropriate language? I mean, some of these are, moving to accounting models, I don't know. I feel like that language is not consistent with what the answers are in that category for some of these.
Maybe it's better, who is the payer?
Who's the investor?
Who's passing?
Who pays? Who pays?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good.
Did whoever wrote this, did they have trouble picking whether something should be a con versus another issue?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Other issues versus cons, pros.
That was something suggested from Gina's notes that we had on other issues, so I just took some notes from the previous matrix and tried to skim it down somewhat.
So we might want to look at those and just, you want to read them and say, oh, I get why that's in that column versus why it's in other issues versus cons, or that you could conflate columns if you didn't feel there was a distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a catch-all. Some of it's timing issues, some of it's legal issues. It's just something that's not necessarily good or bad. It just is what it is, and there's not
Other considerations or something like that.
Yeah, issues some people could perceive as a negative, issue
Right.
being a negative thing.
Maybe it should just be additional considerations. Additional considerations.
So Tim, maybe this is not the direction you want to go, but I think before the teams do additional work, should we be looking at whether all of these at this point we believe are viable. We have shedded things along the way.
Yeah.
And there is 4 of them to me. I think some people will only go for 3 of those that I believe are not viable. But I'll just put it out right now, if it's okay with you, that I'm not sure capital millage, Headley override, or special assessment district rise to the merit of additional due diligence and additional debate and discussion by the group.
So let me just piggyback on that. If you'll recall, we originally had 17 items, I think. And we made a first cut to, in effect, say, the city should consider every one of these, but they don't necessarily rise to the weight. So in effect, what I think your suggestion would be is, are there several here, the ones you mentioned?
As we gain more knowledge, we shouldn't keep going down.
That we
keep riding
basically
a dead
say-
horse.
Yeah, we basically say the city should consider them, but the panel's not gonna make them.
They don't merit going to the next level.
And just
The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
There you go, thank you.
And yours were capital millage, Headley override, and what was the third one?
Special assessment.
Thank you. Okay?
I mean, I'd argue, I agree, I mean, neither of those 3 are really appealing to me, but I don't know if there's really any work left on those particular ones, other than just putting it into this. We already have the fact sheets done. It seems like if we're gonna have fact sheets, they should be consistent with this matrix. You know, we obviously have all the things we've already taken off the plate. They don't have fully developed fact sheets. These ones already do, minus, you know, some editing we've all just gone through.
But I think there's debate and discussion that needs
Oh.
to take place.
We can
If
take
we're
that
gonna
off,
use-
yeah.
If we're gonna use our time for debate and discussion, let's use that to focus on those that collectively we believe upgrades.
So let me ask you another question. I think this is in a different category, but it seems to me we've got violent agreement on the importance of development infill, even though it doesn't solve the problem. The general fund issue. So the question is, do we want to take that off the table as well? I mean, that it would clearly be a recommendation of the panel that the city should do whatever it can to stimulate it, but that I'm not sure we necessarily need to evaluate it in the same way.
I would like to talk about it some more because I think the value is coming to a consensus of what that means.
Okay.
So the consensus may be, we think the city should add expenses to do this and it should be a focus. And so if we're giving best advice,
Okay.
then there may be some things that the group, or we should see, change some kind of regulatory environment to stimulate that. So I would hate to lose the momentum on that one.
So if we went with Ron's suggestion, we would be looking at 6 items that we need to do more in-depth work on. And I'll just say development infill, income tax, Public Act 33, countywide law enforcement millage increase, parking system, because there's now 3 options, there's 3 variations there, and water and wastewater. I mean, those would be the ones that, in effect, we'd be saying we're going to devote significant energy to in future meetings.
But let's go back to Matt's comment, because I think that we do have the fact sheets put
Yep.
together, and I think as part of our report, we can have those either as an addendum
Sure.
or as part of our discussion, so that people can see that we consider these. These will come forward from other people.
That's a good point.
And I don't think we should just push them aside.
I agree.
So I would opt for,
Okay,
I'm concerned that we're
Okay.
evaluating too much
Exactly.
before we get into
so,
the evaluation.
so
criteria.
let's do this then. Let's keep all 9 on the
right,
table, but we obviously are going to need differential time to consider some versus others.
well, I think we could move those to the bottom of the list and consider the other 6.
Yeah.
Like tier 2 or something.
Exactly right.
Yeah, in effect, what we may have is 3 tiers.
Right.
6 in tier 1, 3 in tier 2, and the other things that we already.
Balance of the 7.
Right, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'm going to apologize and make a suggestion. I had done a draft of guiding principles that I left on the printer in my office. So, and if you'll recall, what we're basically saying is we want to make sure that we're looking at like overall guiding principles that we'd be considering. But I can tell you what they were, and we can either have a preliminary discussion or we can defer it to next time. What my suggestion would be is that we use the 6 strategic focus areas from the city's long-term strategic plan as those guiding principles. I'll summarize them in a minute. But the reality of it is they've already been vetted significantly with the citizens. So here's what they are: economic vitality, neighborhood development, environmental stewardship, community building, responsible and responsive government, and fiscal stewardship. Now, I'm not suggesting we necessarily have an in-depth discussion, but I will send that out in the packet for discussion next time. But what those seem to me would be, the benefit of those is significantly vetted with the community, and also kind of broad guiding principles that, and the interesting thing about it is there's both some that are growth oriented and some that are cost containment oriented, which I think captures some of the real early concern of the committee, is that even though our mandate is on one side of it, it's not like we think the city should just do this all on the revenue side. It really is this sense of what's responsible stewardship and so on. So I'm going to suggest we discuss them next time when you can look at them in writing. We'll send them out ahead so we can consider it. And it's a starting point for discussion. We can certainly go from there.
Are you suggesting that what we just talked about would be put under one of those broad? Is that what the, I'm missing.
Weighted scores
Yeah.
against those goals?
No, I wasn't even that specific.
Okay.
So here's what I was thinking, is that what we would be saying is that the panel's recommendation, if we agree to this, we use these as guiding principles as we did the pros and cons for each option. You know, does it stimulate economic development, vitality? Does it contribute to neighborhood development, and so on? So I'm not sure if those are, but in my mind, when we originally started this, I thought we might use the same set of criteria for each option. I think the options are varied enough that you do have to do the pros and cons on an item by item basis. But I was trying to get at, Marilyn, what I thought you were so good at in the early meetings, are basically saying, you know, we need to do this against some vision for the
Right.
future
But
that's
that's why
bigger
I'm-
than just, yeah.
Right, that's why I'm asking how we're going to use those. Are we going to try to categorize these under each of those broad objectives?
Where do they fit
In
in terms of
fit,
achieving those
and
goals?
why and how, what's the justification? Let's look at them.
Yeah. No,
I think it's a phenomenal exercise, Tim. We just went through, had them listed, and we personally scored
Yeah.
each thing against them. It would at least tell us that where the deltas are in the discussion.
Yeah, and I don't think it would make the decision, but it would set the table for the right discussion about.
It would help us have focused discussion as opposed to purely on opinion or what I felt like from eating lunch.
Yeah,
And consistent with what city commission and the citizens have already established as the priorities, so we're not using a different set of criteria to make judgments on than what has already been established for the community.
It also is the categories that's driving priority-based budgeting, so there's an alignment there.
So there's consistency.
So should we have that as an exercise prior to the next meeting? And just a reminder, we don't have a city commission meeting that night, so we talked about maybe extending the length of the next meeting, November 2nd, beyond.
Thank you. Well, if you recall our discussion, what we said was we did not want to extend the timeline. But what we did want to do was, if necessary, extend a meeting. I think we're getting down to the point where we need some pretty in-depth discussion on these major items.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the next meeting might be appropriate to look at going later.
So Tim, if I could suggest that we get a fact sheet for each thing and then attach to it a scorecard, if you will, of the priorities. And then people can begin in preparation for the meeting, can create their own scorecards, but it gives us a place to have, to base our discussion from, instead of reinventing why we plowed this ground.
Yeah, so it'd be, so actually, I think it'd be three things. It'd be fact sheet, cover matrix, and score sheet. Okay, good. Okay, so that'd be pre-work people bring into the meeting, and we'll go from there.
And I would concur with you and the manager that we should be prepared to go long that night if we're going to not be buying each other Christmas presents. Not that I'm cheap.
Well, no.
I'm 2X.
Well,
so keep it in mind.
the other thing is, if you know, if we get done earlier, don't need a meeting. That's all so fine. Okay, thank you for your hard work. We'll get you this in preparation for the next meeting, and we're making progress.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Good meeting this morning, appreciate your time.
It's good hot, it's good cold, and it's reheatable. There's so many other things in town that we do. I've tried it in the oven, I've tried sauteing it.
Teacher engagement program and get that.
I love it fresh. Absolutely.
Well, I hit the roof.
All right, that's fair.
Just pay for us all. Just I'm gonna go see Jerry, he's the new chief of staff, and for teacher engagement. But we need all that money spent.
Thank you.
Because they'll keep giving out $10,000 grants till it has zero.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
If I see her loitering outside the front door,
See you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Is it going well?
Yeah, not a whole lot left to do. Knocking doors basically every moment. I have some signs left. If you, I can.
Wish I had a yard.
Where should I put them?
You want to do ransom? You can do ransom. You want to go out to Walbridge? Yeah, North Street. You just call ransom from Walbridge. You see the line or something. Mingling with
So
the crowd.
just look for those two spots.
Yeah, and then also across the
Well, yeah, that's okay.
Almost done. Yes. That's why you do it when you're young. Bye, John.
Nice.
That'll change things, and then we will.
Thanks, man.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
Learn, figure out.
Do you know if there are any extras of the sheet that's handed out? I emailed
emailed it to you. The one. Did I get it?
Yeah, no, I think it's
Second
awesome.
email that I sent?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nope,
got
I think
that.
that's awesome.
Is that the
We
one
love
with
to
all
know.
of them?
Awesome. Thank you.
The packet has everything except for that. Oh, you mean the that Tim used? He's probably got some copies, but I did not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
That's yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If you don't, what do you need? One more.
Talking about traffic.
I passed them around, but I think they're sitting.
Saturday, when I get to my office, because I always
See if they are.
And so,
Yeah, they're.
so, you know, they're all.
I knew they had.
No less.
You don't have to give us your copy?
Directing traffic, private sector, we would.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Taken out. Yeah.
Oh, I know. You can't, no, you can't. And it's gonna.
So I'm trying to come up with ideas, and I just can't get it.
Well, I wonder if an interesting starting point, because I know they have non-public safety officers on staff that do ticketing.
So I definitely think we need to get the same.
That concept translates into those other things, like,
I
believe, waivers come down to, you know, for an event.
Rooms run into this in Muskegon where, you know, they had this, they're downtown, they had the summer was just programmed festival after festival after festival. And from, you know, huge motorcycle rallies, all this stuff, but the amount the city was charging police, the festivals were dying. Like they couldn't do it, so it was like.
Well, because the cost is so high, we can't charge because of the compensation.
Sure, so but what's the alternative? What do you?
Clerks, for example, you know, you train people in traffic, you pay them $30,000. So,
Yeah, no, and we are, that's no, but we need to, if it's apples, it needs to be.
I'm just trying to get into the issue, and so you mentioned, you know, we can't, you can't take on the other way you do it is to say.
If you came in the second position,
Yeah, you might be able to make private
for us, we got all the first.
Boy, I think we should do it.
I know Tom was saying, well, you say, our general funds are not until
December 31, 2017. You'd have to say we can't pay unless it.
Well, what they're thinking is if you did a one-time, you did a one-time sale, and you had that.
So, we're talking about traffic cameras now. It's okay for criminals, they take a picture of you speeding on I-94 as a.
Hi, Jeff.
That's okay.
We gave you an assignment that's.
So they asked in Detroit, what if we Detroit had a same ordinance, you can take a traffic, but for a civil. So if you're speeding on one of the streets, you're $20.
I tried to do as much formatting.
Attorney General says no, because it would conflict with the. What we ended up with, the criminal statute. It's really.
It was the previous attorney general too.
And so, I'm asking state manager, is
Yeah.
there a way that?
And it just was multiple others, I mean,
Find a solution to that, because in cities, municipalities have the ability to take, take it out. Manpower.
I think we need to figure out where that's worked, you know, because like I said, there are problems in some cases, but if there's places where it works and it's saved money and increased revenue, sure, let's explore it.
Because everybody in the
Well,
media
should have the ability to do that, that'd be pretty cool. Anyway,
That was one I can say I've not heard come up, but, I don't see that being really controversial.
What happened? What happened?
What we say, no more. We say.
Hey, but only 12? You're like going down Western Hill. Couldn't possibly get 30.
No, you.
So that's possible, just Thursday.
So it reestablished all.
Yeah, Thursday is three.
Friday, the end of the day.
I got a red light today.
Let's think about
I
what
was
I-
driving my mom's car.
Friday, I can do it
Phoenix
between
10 years ago. I was like.
2:30